Hello, hello. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and you have just joined me on the Frame of Mind Coaching podcast. Today, I have a very good friend of mine, a past coaching client, but an esteemed colleague, and really, I think one of the smartest people I know. Bruce Eckfeldt is with me. Bruce, welcome.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here.
So one of the things that always kind of stunned me and surprised me as we were working together years and years and years ago is your operational brilliance, like your ability to lay things out, to get things done, to really take on processes and operations in a way that I've never seen anyone do, like never. You journal differently from everybody else.
Yes.
You organized everything differently than anybody else. You just got a lot more done, probably in a lot shorter time than anyone else I've ever encountered. So that was always interesting to me. And now you are working with entrepreneurs. Tell us what exactly you're doing.
Yeah. So after selling my technology company a couple of years ago, have focused on strategic coaching. So my primary job is working with CEOs and their leadership teams on their growth strategy. I talk about growth, strategy development and strategy execution. So we help figure out how they're going to grow and scale the business, and then what do we need to do on the leadership team to be able to execute on that on a consistent basis, quarterly planning. And obviously right now we're grappling with a whole bunch of change and a whole bunch of uncertainty in businesses. So I'm helping them work through that process of figuring out how is it going to impact their business? How do they need to respond? What kind of goals do they set given the situation we're in?
So I want to get there in a minute, but let's just say times are normal. What have you seen historically that leaders typically grapple with? Like, what's the number one thing that keeps popping up over and over again for leaders, for entrepreneurs as they're growing and scaling their businesses?
So primarily, I find the challenges around strategy, meaning that, a company can get to 5, 10 million in revenue, not necessarily easily, but they can get there through just kind of hard work and sales and being super persistent and kind of nose to the grindstone. Once you get to that point, really scaling a company effectively through that kind of 10 million mark into the hundreds of millions of dollars takes real strategic focus. And the challenge there is the faster you want to scale, the more you need to focus and the more you need to really hone what is your product and service, what is the value proposition, how are you going to deliver that, how do you operationalize those things, make it super consistent so you can make it really repeatable and really scalable. And a lot of leaders and a lot of leadership teams just struggle with that process. And typically it's about making some decisions, about focusing on a couple of things, being really good at those, being willing to not be so good at a whole bunch of other things. And that's tough. It's tough to make those decisions. It's tough to double down on that. And so generally what I'm doing is helping that team figure out what that should be, strategically, what they should focus on, and then how do they execute on that.
So it sounds like as we scale, it sounds like scaling is like this, but what you're really asking people to do is to narrow down and really, really focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really kind of pinpoint what their expertise is and what business they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think as entrepreneurs, and I coach a lot of them, the basic nature of entrepreneurs is to invent, to try new things, to experiment, to grow in, every which direction they can think of. And really focusing isn't one of their natural necessarily strengths.
Yeah. I actually wrote a piece on Inc.com on this. Was being the founder is not always being the CEO. And it really talks about the difference between what a good founder does and then what a good CEO does. Areas of focus, the things that they spend their time on, kind of the way that they think, and they're quite different. A founder is really about finding opportunity, getting traction in a market, sales, building an initial team, building a company culture. And a CEO is very much around finding strategic focus, bringing in, operating procedures, figuring out how to grow, various aspects of the business, market opportunities, engaging the industry. And not all founders become really good CEOs, and nor should they be. A lot of founders should be founders, and they should focus on finding new opportunities, whether it's within the business that they started or finding new businesses to start. But at some point, you need to make that shift. Not all the entrepreneurs can make that shift, and it's one of the big challenges with being able to grow the company.
So let me ask you a question, because this is a very interesting time in our lives, and I want to discuss kind of current times in greater detail, but it's a time also where a lot of founders kind of sit back and go, okay, so hold on a minute. the rug has just been pulled out from underneath me. Do I even want to still do what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're really kind of evaluating where they've been struggling for a while, and where they are now and where they want to go. Is there an indicator for a founder? Is there a moment? Is there a sign that says, yes, I need to find a CEO and I need to move over? Like, what are the indicators? What are the kind of, neon signs that they should pay attention to?
And I think there's two things that typically come up in the conversations that I have with founders that are at that crossroads. I mean, one is kind of an internal question: is do they feel drawn, compelled, excited about taking the company to the next level? And quite often that answer is no. I mean, a lot of times we'll model the company at a larger level. We'll talk about, what does $100 million look like? What does your day-to-day look like? How does your leadership team look like? And they put themselves in that place and they're not happy, right? They visualize themselves in that mode and they're like, I don't think I'm going to be happy doing this. So that's sort of the internal question. The external question is really, when you look at the business and the market that they're in, what needs to get done, what the company needs from a leader at that point, and really kind of taking stock of, look, is this fit with the skills and capabilities of the person who's in the leadership seat at that point? And are those the changes that they want to make and can effectively make? Or is it better to bring in someone that's been through that process? And somewhat depends on the market that they're in. If they're going into a fairly traditional market, or they're growing into a fairly traditional market, and there's a lot of highly experienced CEOs out there that have taken companies from 10 to $100 million, and there's opportunity, it might be, just from a company point of view, it might be better off finding someone who's done that. If that's not a developed market and there's not as much of an opportunity, it may make more sense for the founder to actually move into that CEO role and do the work they need to do to step into that role. So I really look at it as part internal and part external.
So is there a dollar revenue amount where you say, okay, that's the magic number? You keep, mentioning from 10 million to 100 million. Can they consider moving over at 2 million, for example?
Yeah, so the dollar volumes are kind of a proxy. I mean, I usually look at the organizational complexity, how many people they have in the organization. And so that for me is a better indicator of the leadership complexity. If you're 50 to 100 people, I think that's when some of these questions start to come up. Leading an organization of several hundred people is different than leading an organization of dozens of people. And so I think that's where some of these leadership challenges come up. Can they step over earlier? And they certainly can. I mean, I think there's, I encourage founders to go as far as they can and far as they're comfortable and far as long as they're effective, but both kind of engaged and effective as leaders. So I think there's a, probably 5 to 10 million is what I would be looking at in terms of dollar volume, and 50 to 100 people is what I'd be looking in terms of organizational complexity, where I think there's a pretty big inflection point where those questions start to really come to bear, and you really need to ask yourself. So in some cases it might be more, and some, depending on the nature of the business and the type of people you have inside of it, it might be 200, but it's really that organizational complexity that I think drives the question.
So let's switch gears for a moment. I mean, the coronavirus has hit everybody everywhere.
Yeah.
And you came out with a really interesting article helping leaders identify their top priorities. Yeah. The most important things they need to look at, think about, address immediately. And I'd love for you to share with us what is on that list. What should we be looking at? What should we be thinking about? What should we be kind of addressing immediately?
Yeah. So the list came out of, basically I had a series of conversations with all my CEO clients, just helping them deal with the immediate information that was coming at them, dealing with their current situations, and just having several of these conversations, finding a series of themes or a series of things that we kept talking about or I kept recommending. And so I put them into this article, which has a series of recommendations, priorities for CEOs dealing with this immediate situation that they're in. It's based on two things. One is that we have also a lot of uncertainty. So we're dealing with a situation, and we've been talking about this. It's not like even 9/11 and Sandy. I'm based here in New York, and we've been through these kind of crises. But the difference is that those things were events that happened, and it was about recovery, and you could kind of sit down and map out the recovery plan, or estimate how long certain things were going to take. In this case, it's still coming at us, right? We haven't hit the peak even in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how long the peak is going to, how big the peak is going to be, how long it's going to take, like what's going to happen. Because more uncertainty is coming at us, it's really different that way. So one, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and changing in that uncertainty. The other thing is the rate of change increasing dramatically, right? So if you have a lot of uncertainty and the rate of change increasing, it changes a lot of how you go about strategy thinking, strategy planning, dealing with this new information or the lack of information, and how do you make decisions. So everything that I've been talking about is how to make better decisions given this context. So the first thing I've been recommending to folks is really increasing your planning cycle. Right. So instead of setting kind of quarterly goals, we're setting weekly goals. What are the 2 to 3 things you need to focus on each week? And really being good at getting your team aligned around those priorities. And they can be quite immediate. I've got some teams who are dealing with how they need to message things out to customers. I've got some teams who are focused on their internal employees. I've got some teams that are figuring out how to apply for loans. Is really sorting through all the things that are going on. What are the 2 or 3 things I need to focus on in the next 7 days as a leadership team to really deal with the situation at hand? So that's the first thing. And then we talk about weekly planning meetings. So normally I'm working with teams on a quarterly basis. We're setting goals for 90 days. Now we're setting goals for weeks, and we want to meet weekly and reset those. So we want to understand what's working, what's not, when new information has come at us. What do we need to revise? What are the new priorities that we have? So really focusing into a weekly cycle. And really that's a function of any time the rate of change increases, the frequency of our planning needs to increase. So if I'm working with a fairly staid or company that's in a fairly staid profession, quarterly planning is fine. If they're in an industry that is kind of chugging along in the normal rate, setting 90-day goals is fine. You can deal with new information that's coming in that industry fairly effectively in 90 days. For a high growth company, if I'm dealing with a startup, we may do monthly, setting monthly priorities, just because their environment is changing so quickly. They need to meet more frequently, set priorities more frequently. In this case, we're going weekly, right? Because things are changing so quickly. And then we really want to identify what are the issues and what are the assumptions that we're working with. And this is a tricky one, or it's a key one in terms of anytime you make decisions, you've got to make decisions based on certain sets of assumptions. Normally, these assumptions are fairly staid and fairly stable, and you can kind of plan them. You can rely upon that assumption to be true for a reasonable period of time. The challenge here is these assumptions are not that stable, right? I can assume that we're going to be back to work by the end of April. I can assume that X number, that the economy will go down by a certain percentage. Well, we still need to make decisions, but these assumptions are much more volatile. So I need to track what are the assumptions that I'm making my decisions on, and track whether those assumptions are holding true or not. And when they don't hold true, I need to flag it, and I need to realize I need to revisit these decisions that I'm making.
So I want to just stay here, because I think the concept of assumptions is very important. Like, things are changing at such a rapid pace. What are we basing our assumptions on? How do, I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but I'm following American politics. And, we know that last week your date of return was right after Easter. And I think it was yesterday, there was a new announcement that said the date of return is at the end of April. Having said all that, and I'm hearing what you guys are up to, and, barring any political opinion on this, in my mind, for me, my assumption is we're not even going to look at coming back until June. So how do we make assumptions? Is it based on instinct? Is it based on political decision making? Is it based on, a good guess? What is it actually based on?
Yeah. So there's 2 things that I try to do when we're talking about assumptions, and when on a leadership team anywhere, we're working with a group that's trying to make decisions as a group, and we're trying to figure out what these assumptions are. One is I want to make sure that I'm gathering the collective wisdom, right? I want to be talking with the members of the team and finding out what information do we have collectively as a team that will help feed into making good assumptions. And the rules around that, or the things you can do around that, making sure that people feel safe to put information on the table, and making sure that you've got sort of equal airtime from everyone. If you have one person go, if the CEO says, well, I think we're going to be back to work by April 30th, what do you think? That's going to really influence the nature of the conversation I have. So I do things like I have everyone write it down on a piece of paper first. And I find ways to make sure that I'm really getting people's opinions out on the table. Because one, I want to get all the data, or I want to have everyone's opinion on, even if someone has a crazy idea of what it is, they may know something or they may intuit something about the situation we're in, which we really need to pay attention to.
Right.
So one is making sure I've got everyone's really diverse information, opinions on the table. The other thing is I always want to be talking about assumptions in probability, right? I never want to be talking about, well, we're going to be back by April 30th. What I want to know is what's the best case, what's the likely case, and what's the worst case of each one of these things. So back to work is going to be, well, best case is probably going to be, the team may say the best case scenario is April 30th right now. The most likely case is end of May, and there's an off chance we might be in this till the end of June, right? And I don't want to frame those. I always frame them in a 20%, 50%, 80% probability, which is, there's a 20% chance we're going to be at this end at the best case. 50-50, we're going to be end of May. And there's a 20% chance we need to acknowledge that there's a chance we could be in this till June. And I want to have those probabilities, or I want to have those ranges for each one of these. Because if that range is very tight, meaning that my 80%, my 20% are really not that different, I have a fairly stable or a fairly tight assumption around the date that I can kind of plan on. If my dates are really wide, that means that there's a lot of uncertainty in this. And I really need to think through what are the consequences of being in those ranges.
And how do you establish your probabilities? Is that also just best guess?
Well, so hopefully I've worked with the team for a while and we've talked about probabilities and we've gone through exercises to talk about what does 20% look like. Right. But really it becomes down to kind of if you were putting odds, if you were going to put a bet on this thing, what kind of odds would you need to give me? The 20% should be, really should be, I'm giving you really good odds to take this position. And the highly likely is I'm willing to take really good odds to get that position. So it needs to be something that the team feels like they're willing to put some stake on. In fact, we may even do our decision-making around, well, if there's a 20% chance that this could happen, what's the consequence? What's the benefit? Is it worth taking that kind of chance at that level or not? So I think of it in terms of odds. I mean, I become kind of a bookie in terms of like, what are the odds this would happen? And are you willing to put money against this in different ways?
Right. And you've always been pretty good at numbers and that type of thing. So this is right up your alley.
Yeah. And the teams that I work with, we've actually done, because we've done this in other ways previously inside the business, we will often be able to look at the results and know, well, we're pretty good at 20%, but we're really bad at 80%. And so they'll start to get, with feedback, they'll start to get better at understanding of, if we're really all talking about 80%, this number needs to be out here and not here.
Okay. So what else is on your list of priorities?
So the other things so that's assumptions, issue list. So a lot of what we're dealing with on the teams is there's a lot of things coming at teams right now. Like all these, whether it's logistically, how people are going to work from home, whether it's customers in terms of do I provide terms, do I provide financing or not right now, how do I get this along, is taking all these issues and I'd much rather see a team process 2 or 3 issues really, really well, really dig into it, clarify it, make good decisions, than trying to get through 10 or 15 issues on a surface level. So my goal is always, what are all the issues you're facing? How do you absolutely prioritize them a team and focus on the 2 or 3 things that you can effectively do right now and be really good at that issue processing? We talk about scenario planning. So there's a couple of different ways to do this, but essentially what we're trying to get at, it's a little bit of game theory, where we're looking at what are the possible outcomes. Like, so for example, of when we're back to work. We're back to work end of April, end of May, end of June. Those are 3 different scenarios. What I want to look at are the decisions I need to make. So do I invest in long-term video conferencing technology? Like, do I send everyone new computers that are wired so that you have really good video capabilities? Like, that's a decision. Well, what's the consequence if we go back to work quickly? Well, I may have spent $20,000 more than I needed to here. Right. In the middle case, maybe I'm break even. And the other case, it was a good investment. I want to take each one of those decisions and look at, well, what are the outcomes if I decide this and these 3 different scenarios play out? How does it impact me? How does that decision play out? And what I want to look for are decisions that are either overall maximal, that they're either going to be, regardless of the outcome, are going to be reasonably good, or we're going to minimize potential downsides. And it somewhat depends on my strategy or what I'm trying to achieve at the time. But I always want to be looking at those scenarios. I want to take each one of my decisions and ask the questions, how does this play out if these different cases are true? And you can do sort of second level and third level on that, saying, okay, well, then what I would do, what are my responses? But I always want to be thinking in terms of scenarios in these decisions. And generally I want to keep the scenarios down to 3 or 5. I mean, you could come up with hundreds of different scenarios, but I want to come up with 3 to 5 scenarios that kind of capture different possible outcomes. And then I can use that to evaluate the decisions that I'm trying to make.
And how do you provide strategy? How do you provide guidance for a business that is in an industry where there is absolutely zero revenue coming in? Like, is that an opportunity to start planning and scheming and preparing for the future? Or is that an opportunity to just kind of lay as low as possible, spend as little as possible, and just ride the wave? Like, what's your recommendation there?
Well, so it all starts with really envisioning the future of your business. I would say 6 to 12 months out right now. What does your business look like? What does the market look like? What do your customers look like? And you're going to have to make some guesses, but you can probably make some educated guesses. You may, do a couple of scenarios around it. And because it's once you have that future model kind of outlined, you could then start saying, okay, well, where do I need to be as a business given that future? Now, if the nature of what you do, the product or service you have in that new future is irrelevant, then yes, you either need to be thinking about how do I pivot, right? Is there a potential pivot opportunity? Do I need to grow somehow? Do I need to look for an acquisition? Do I need to be acquired? Right? But it's all based on starting with what does the future look like? And then what do I need to do between now and then to maximize my value at that point? In some cases, I just need to hunker down because the next 3 months, next 6 months, there's going to be no sales. But in 6 months, it's going to take off again, right? I mean, everyone's going to, the need doesn't go away. It's just no one's taking care of it. And so now we're going to have a flood for 3 months of everyone buying or everyone doing these things. So I need to figure out how do I either furlough my staff or how do I get my staff otherwise engaged if I have the cash and I can spend it. If I don't have the cash, how do I build relationships or how do I be able to bring them back at that point? So I need to start thinking about my choices and my plans for being well positioned in that future point. And you're going to have to figure out, you have to make some guesses around what that future looks like. And in some cases, some companies are doing quite well. I've got a couple of companies in cannabis right now. Cannabis is still open for business. And they're in the situation where it's like, hey, like we're actually busy. And they're trying to figure out how do they keep their business going, potentially even grow their business or even do acquisitions around their business over the next couple of months because the demand is going to be quite high. Now, we still need to think about what does 6 to 12 months look like out, but it's really all about what does the future look like and then how do you make decisions to position yourself?
One last question.
Yeah.
How do you recommend that business owners kind of take care of their employees? Like keep them engaged if they're still working, keep them engaged if they're laid off and they want them back. Keep them feeling safe and secure when sometimes business owners don't feel safe and secure themselves. Like any recommendations on that front?
Yeah. Well, so all of the conversations that I've had, I always check in with my CEO first and how they're doing, right? How is he or she, what is their mental state, right? Like how is their how's their headspace?
How's their frame of mind?
How's their frame of mind? And we kind of have to start there because if that isn't clear, if that isn't in a good, reasonable, stable point, they're not going to make good decisions. They're not going to have good interactions. So we kind of need to focus on that first. So once we can kind of get that clear enough, at least temporarily, and a lot of this with CEOs, I'm having conversations. Look, you just need to find 4 hours a day, 6 hours a day to be able to clear your head, to focus on these things. You are going through a huge amount of stress. You're not going to be there for very long, but you need to find that space where you can do that work. Think strategically, communicate with your leadership team, be there, be present, be focused on them. And once you kind of have that space and you can do that, yes, then you have these conversations I always start with the leadership team. Like you need to be there for your team and you need to realize all of your team is in that same situation, right? So you have to go person by person and understand where is each person on this continuum. And if you are trying to, address the team at a very high strategic level, but members of your team are in crisis fear mode, they're not going to be thinking well. So you need to kind of address the team and get the team up to a minimal kind of minimal functional area to be able to make these decisions. In terms of communicating out, I mean, one of the big things I'm telling everyone is, having at least a weekly meeting, a weekly check-in meeting with all of their teams, and some kind of daily huddle where they're doing some kind of like, what did we get done yesterday? What do we focus on today? What new information is in place? And a regular communication out to the entire company. So as a leader, as a CEO, as founder, making
a lot more touch points.
Yeah, more touch points. Even if there's a great interview I did on one of my podcasts with Chris Voss, who was the FBI negotiator. One of the things he told me, which I thought was brilliant, trust. The number one thing you can do to build trust is frequent, consistent communication, right? Just having something go out every single day, even if it's, hey, you know what? Nothing much is going on right now. Nothing's really changed. We talked to this thing. This didn't have, nope, nothing changed with our clients. Everyone seems to be doing well. Just want to let everyone know. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Like,
I
even if
listened
there's
to that
no
podcast
news.
Twice.
Yeah, it's a really powerful one. He's got some great stories and everything.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that I realized. I think sometimes as leaders in these situations, we're like, well, no, there's nothing new, so I don't want to say anything. Like, I only want to communicate if I've got new information. It's actually the reverse. The more that you can communicate on a regular basis, even if it's no news, the easier it's going to be to deliver the really important news and the critical news, because people are going to be looking for that daily communication, expecting that message.
So interestingly enough, I'm doing all of my in-person presentations have moved to an online format. Not a big surprise, but one of the things that is my mission in life is to help leaders acquire coaching skills, to teach them how to coach their team. And never has it been more important than now. Because at the end of the day, if you are able to have those kinds of conversations with your team members and keep them focused, keep them engaged, address really their fears and all the beliefs they have that might be causing them to panic, then you're keeping kind of an anchor in the shore and keeping everything kind of safe and steady. And I think that skill is really important right now at this time.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, it's it's everything I've been doing with my clients. It's what I'm advising my clients to do with their leadership team members. Without a good frame of mind, without good, clear thinking, you're not going to be able to make good decisions. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah. For us, one of the things that we've done with not only our coaches and our team and our extended frame of mind community is we've invited everyone to join a free journaling community, just so that they have a safe place to express themselves. Because when you're a leader, you often don't have a place to go. You don't have a place to say and express your fears. You're supposed to be, valiant. You're supposed to be strong. And there's no real place where you can be vulnerable. So we invite people to come to our community. Again, no cost, no politics, no social media, but just a place where you can write exactly what's on your mind, what you're experiencing, what your fears are, what your hopes are, and what you plan to do moving forward. So that's, one way that we communicate, not only with our team, but with everybody in our community.
Yeah, no, that's great. I would encourage it. I mean, I think one of the things as leaders is we need to be able to think about different options, consider different alternatives. And sometimes those are not things we want to talk with our teams about right away, right? And being able to actually work through the idea a little bit with yourself, in some kind of format, seeing that written down is hugely valuable.
Yes.
So highly encourage people to do that.
Bruce, how do people find you? I mean, this is a good time to be talking to someone like Bruce in particular, because his mind has a very unique logic system, which I think is very, very valuable right now. How do they find you?
Well, the easiest, you can always email me, bruce@eckfeldt.com, ECKFELDT.com.
Spell it again.
Yeah. So the website, ECKFELDT.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram and all those cases. But yeah, probably easiest is email. Just reach out. I'm doing actually free coaching sessions for folks for a little while, just leaders who are struggling, who need a space to kind of think through some of the issues that they're grappling with. I'm happy to jump on the phone with folks, just trying to be there for leaders who are struggling, kind of thinking through things. Happy to get on the phone with folks. Amazing.
Take him up on the offer. It's always interesting to talk to Bruce because, again, hands down, he's going to ask you questions that you've never thought of from a really logical, straight line, operational standpoint that, things you really need to consider right now.
Yeah.
Bruce, Thank you for spending this time with me. I appreciate it. I always like seeing your face and talking to you and catching up. It's always good, and keep doing what you're doing, because obviously you're offering a lot of value to people. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate the time.